There is nothing on this earth as desolate as an abandoned farmhouse. This motorbike was left here one day some 3 years ago, and the spring grasses reached across the tires and locked it to the farmyard floor. More than 20 homesteads near the village of Glencolumbkille once made this empty landscape into an Irish community. There are only 4 families left. This was once the village of Port in Glencolumbkille, County Donegal. Everyone is now gone. This was the village street, now covered with grass. Potato ridges. And a few walls remain. This morning, a man said that he had been to a dance in this house less than 12 years ago. Families have either moved down into the valley of Glencolumbkille or have gone to Birmingham, Manchester, or Glasgow. About 3 years ago, the community of Glencolumbkille, numbering about 1,000 souls, lived lives of great privation on their mountain farms. For the most part, their homes were remote cottages with a rick of turf for warmth against the Atlantic chills, a shelter for animals, a few sheep, a rood of potatoes, a little weedy hay were all their wealth. The visitor approaches Glencolumbkille on a swerving, bumpy road. The guidebook describes it as the most inaccessible village in all Ireland. The people were traditionally poor. A compassionate native government had done what it could. A small Tweed mart was set up in the village, and actual want was held at bay by the humane disbursement of unemployment doles. But the young had fled. 12 years ago, a missionary curate, Fr McDyer, returned from England where he had worked with our emigrants. He began, as priests must, with the sacramental life of his people in the parish. This priest brought a terrible energy, the like of which had never been known before, into the sluggish life of Glencolumbkille. This was an energy that was fed from a passionate and Christian anger, that people given to the church by God should be driven from their homeland by want. He traveled to Dublin, walked through government departments, interviewed sympathetic officials. Went to America, traveled from city to city throughout the United States to meet Donegal men wherever he could find them. He returned for consultations with his friends at home. He sought for knowledge. He found technicians, sought advice. His first duty, he felt, was to inculcate in the people themselves a spirit of self-help and a knowledge of democratic procedures. Every man of ideas, every woman of education, every person of energy, he gathered together. He addressed meetings far and wide, but always and insistently, and with great gentleness. He spoke to his own people of their primary need. Be ye not hearers only, but doers of the word. He spoke of them and of their need to love one another, and to love one another effectively from their common faith. Religion was taught to them as a practical charity and a reliance on the providence of God in the certainty of his superabundant grace.
Considerations before us. The first consideration is that we should be worthy members of that mystical body. It is unthinkable that a member of a body should act contrary to the rest of the body, and particularly contrary to the direction and impulses from the head. It is completely unnatural and, I suppose, impossible that any member of the body can act independently by itself, apart from the rest of the body. A hand cut off from the rest of the body cannot act by itself. Therefore, number one consideration, my dear brethren, is that we as members of the mystical body must act together and act in concord with the head of that body, who is Christ.
Father McDyer had enlisted the aid of a small committee of local people who now helped him in the arduous work of persuasion. Let us help one another. Let us cooperate. Let us cease to rely on others. Rely first on our own individual strength. Let us form a cooperative. Let us pool our money and give our land, give our labor, give our time. Give us your trust, talk about it, think about it, and then come and help us work. Glencolumbkille, he told the people, need not die. With God's help, Glencolumbkille should not die. A Christian people had lived in Glencolumbkille for more than 1,000 years. And Father McDyer was determined that this Christian community should not die. He brought the people back to the prime source of their strength and the source of their will to survive, to the great traditions of St. Columkille, for whom this little valley was a base for his great missions. The penitential stations in the valley became the center of a cult of the saint. A hall was built in 12 weeks. For the first time, people had a place to meet and to come down from the mountains and from the surrounding valleys. And people came to play cards, to talk together, and to cooperate on the most simple level, things that up to then had been virtually impossible. The situation was not only economically, but was also culturally complex. This is a part of the Gaeltacht. Almost all the people use Irish all the time. Father McDyer had been anxious from the beginning that intensive modernization should not weaken the strong local traditions and local culture. There is a wonderful local tradition in dancing and music, quite peculiar to the valley. He organized a string orchestra of traditional fiddlers and encouraged in his new hall the house cales on a larger scale that had almost died out in the cottages because of the emigration of the young. Two old film projectors were bought by the committee and pressed into service. The Department of Agriculture, commercial companies, cinema agents all supplied films. Some films of entertainment, but mostly films of instruction. All of this was part of the educational process that now became possible because the village had a hall. The course of persuasion now took a firm line. Father McDyer asked the people to trust him and his committee with their savings. And these simple people, from their poverty, subscribed the astounding sum of £8,000. The course of sermons initiated by Father McDyer might strike the visitor as extraordinarily theological and perhaps abstract for such a simple place. But these sermons on the mystical body were directly to the point that the people were now trying to realize in their lives.
Holy direction from the head of that body that we must be worthy members of that body, in the sense that we must expunge from our lives now and forever all thought of selfishness or despicable self-interest. And we must hold before our minds the important fact that we must act for the interests of all the members of that body and the interests of the head. Consequently, my dear brethren, let you and I go forward as members of this mystical body in concert, in concord, and in unison with the head, helping ourselves both materially and spiritually here below, so that we will enjoy everlasting concord and happiness with the head of the mystical body hereafter. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Long before it had begun in most parts of Ireland, the liturgical revival was underway in Glencolumbkille. Every skill in existence was pressed into service. Necessary skills that did not exist were taught. Confraternities and Catholic associations that he had formed throughout this district of the parish of Glencolumbkille, Father McDyer began to prepare his people for the full sacramental participation in the dialogue Mass.
In the second place, so that you yourselves will be able to impart that understanding gradually to the other members of the congregation. Now, of course, fortitudo, and what's that as you can this time? Quia tu es Deus, fortitudo mea, quae me replenisti, et quae Christus cielo dum afflictit me inimicus. Very good indeed, Gerd, that's fine.
Money having been collected throughout the neighboring parishes and his own, and outside help and interests having been secured, Father McDyer began to press his work to something like finality. A cooperative society had been formed.
And that is to make it clear to every person that they cannot stand alone, that as members of the mystical body, they all belong to one another and integrated in one another with our Lord. And consequently, from a point
Major General Costello of the Irish Sugar Company, an early supporter of Father McDyer.
This is one of the ways in which the people who are flying out of the West can be kept there, in which the depopulation that's taking place can be reversed.
So was Peadar O'Donnell, revolutionary.
I think what I would most urgently like to say about the western seaboard is that the dispersal of the population there is not of necessity, but very largely from neglect, which is rather a fantastic business, really, because these were the people who threw themselves heart and soul into the independence movement. And then when some measure of independence was achieved, an economy was developed that turned its back to those people and latched itself on to economic imperialism across the water, and left these people out in the cold.
All this apathy and lack of confidence among the people of the West can be overcome by an emphasis on the Christian concept of charity, and also on a very, very earnest drive of local leadership.
The cry is being raised that social services to the people in the West are a burden on the expanding industry in the East, and that therefore the population of the West has got to be still further dispersed. This is really an impertinence. One of the weaknesses in this situation is that hitherto the voices that have been raised have been just a little bit made noises against this thing, but no anger or no agitation has been developed. And all that these little noises did was to make people feel that nothing can be done on their own behalf.
One of the reasons, I believe, why we have foundered around so much since 1922 in connection with economic development is that people have the notion that's long exploded elsewhere, that men are moved principally or solely by economic calculations. They're also moved, I think, by sentiment, by local patriotism, by a feeling that they're doing something worthwhile or a feeling that they're wanted. And if a whole population or if any family or if any member of a family gets it into their head that they're not wanted, well, you can't expect them to be economic producers.
A cooperative having been formed and registered, shares were offered first to the people of Glencolumbkille and the neighbouring parishes. These ideas, notwithstanding the year's preparation, were still strange to most people. The Irish Sugar Company, having offered a market for the produce of 200 acres for vegetables for canning, it was not sufficient that the people should buy shares merely in the cooperative. They must be prepared to place their labour and their skills, above all their land, at the disposal of the cooperatives committee. Money came in now in some measure, and factory building commenced. Farmers were encouraged to sow seed of a specification and quality recommended by the officials of the sugar company. Potatoes for crisps and slices were a primary need to keep a factory going through the long winter months and keep up a high level of local employment. The soil was poor. Skilled labor was not plentiful, but everything available was pressed into service. Cabbages were sown to the tune of about 40 acres. Fertilizers were supplied, and heavy machinery was rented at low cost to the farmers for the preparation of the ground. The factory was now in operation. Skilled help from the Irish Sugar Company was forthcoming from the beginning. But what had all this to do with the mission of a Catholic priest?
The Glencolumbkille community development It's neither an isolated project on the one hand, nor is it the fighting of a lost cause on the other. It seeks to replace a way of life that has failed and to create an organic relationship which will grow out of the common faith and common citizenship of its people. And it also seeks to give an invigorating message to the many communities in this country to take up the challenge that we ourselves here have accepted. The validity of that success, of course, will depend on the outlook of the people of Glencolumbkille itself. Amidst the din of contending parties, we seek to steer a middle course between capitalism and communism, between cynicism and apathy, and to establish a bond of union and a bond of fraternal charity which will enable people to overcome their many frustrations by united effort and by mutual love under God.
First year, crops were poor. Fertilizers were used too little and too late, and only 40 acres of the promised 200 were forthcoming. Financial losses were heavy, but hope had been kindled in this people's heart that Glencolumbkille would not die. So the McDyer experiment in Glencolumbkille had ended its first 2 years' operations with heavy losses, but with good grounds for reasonable hope. The local people, for the most part, were favorable but cautious. Too little land had been well fertilized, and the crops were too light and too late for canning. Depressed farmers were reluctant to borrow, slow to commit their land to cooperative farming. Mr. Foley, manager of the food factory, explained the failure.
For the past 2 years, we have had very little impact on growers here with regard to giving money back to the growers. There were reasons for this when we started off here. The first one was that there was very low fertility here. The second reason was, of course, the lack of technique. I mean, vegetable growing is completely new to people in this part of Donegal, or this part of Ireland for that matter. And the third reason, of course, is the small acreages that the people were growing.
A further year of farm visits, of meetings and more meetings, of physical exhaustion from journeys, mental exhaustion from thought, argument, and correspondence. Interviews followed. House visitations, field visitations, instructions and advice slowly brought the level of production up to the requirements of modern factory production. Work in the study was followed by work in the fields and in meeting halls. A home knitting cooperative was carefully organized with Mrs. Gillespie as quality control officer. About 200 women of the valley were recruited. An average knitter would produce slightly more than one superbly designed and executed garment each week. This represents an average income of £250, or about $700 per year for part-time work. The knitting cooperative provides not only good money incomes for each family, but pleasant and very necessary social opportunities for the women of the 3 parishes. Their cottages are often remote and lonely. Mrs. Gillespie's own cottage, near the village of Carrick, became headquarters of the knitting cooperative of Glencolumbkille. Herself highly skilled a national winner of the Sybil Connolly Cup for knitwear design, Mrs. Gillespie inspected and put the final touches to every garment destined for markets in the United States, Britain, and at home. Fr McDyer himself acted as salesman. For example, last year, he obtained one continuing order from a Dublin fashion house for £4,500 worth of these garments. The full wholesale price of each garment being returned always to the knit. Miss Bond of the Country Women's Association toured the cottages on behalf of the tourist drive in the valley.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. How are you? O'Donnell. Well, I'm from the Irish Country Women's Association, and Father McDyer asked me if I'd drop in and find out if you'd like to know more about our scheme for helping people to raise their incomes by taking in holiday visitors.
Well, we'll be glad to hear some more about it.
Entering on the third year, hope had hardened into determination and pride. The training of young men in the district, otherwise destined for the emigrantship, was organized in a Tweed weaving class, indoors and out. Messrs. McGee of Donegal provided the services of an instructor. The third year's crops showed a bumper yield. Almost the full quota of land was cultivated. Fertilizing was skillfully and plentifully done. Labor was adequate and well organized. The factory was at last booming. Employment was high and well paid. Great national companies now began continually bringing their supplies to this remote mountain site. Roads once deserted were now crammed with commercial traffic. All this required management skills in which the local people were trained by the experts of the Irish Sugar Company. A complex schedule of delivery dates for the farmers was working like a well-oiled master clock. Crops were carefully graded and weighed on reception. Quality was uniformly high, and the waste rate was low. Major General Costello of the Irish Sugar Company was able to comment.
In the present circumstances, when there's so much attention being paid to our balance of payment, it's an interesting fact that 80% of the production of Glencolumbkille, of the Errigal Co-op factory, has been exported. And I think the content of imported material going into that, I don't know what percentage it is, but it's negligible. It's just some part of the packaging. A good many of the industries that we have depend heavily on the importation of raw material, semi-manufactured goods, so that from a national point of view, national economic point of view, this kind of industry that the Errigal people have launched is a very desirable one.
The economic value of this kind of cooperation consists in the general spread of its effects over the whole community. The growers have a guaranteed market for high quality, high yield, low cost produce. Their families have highly paid and constant employment for a growing hard core of skilled people. Occasional seasonal employment is available during the off periods when there is no work possible on the land, and the fringe benefits are obvious. Work of a quality as high as any in the world is paid for at rates comparable to any in Europe in real terms. Standards of hygiene, inspection, and rigidly supervised, of course, at every step, are reflected in the general life of the community. The local business community's special knowledge is integrated into the enterprise with a maximum benefit to all concerned. And there are no middlemen's profits to be provided for. The most modern machinery available anywhere in the world is used in this factory. This is absolutely essential since costs must be kept down for an export market. The factory manager, Mr. Foley, presents his annual report for the third year.
Reverend Chairman, gentlemen, the position in the factory is as follows. Celery production commenced on the 28th of September. We've had continuous production for 4 weeks. To date, we've turned out 40,082.5 cans and 2 tons of soup powder. Employment at the moment is as follows: 63 women employed and 14 men. Well, now, we hope to finish celery in 5 weeks, but due to increased yields which we didn't anticipate, we will go on for a further fortnight.
Our acreage...
Mr. Roulette, the visiting auditor, comments.
Our yields of crops have increased. We have made a spectacular improvement in yield this year, and with more produce and of a higher quality to produce or to process, as you would expect, our financial standing has also improved.
I prefer to quote some concrete examples, if you will allow me to. Now, we have some growers this year. We have one grower in particular. He's growing 3.5 acres. This man's gross profits will be £525. Most of his crop has come in so far. We can estimate the remainder on what he has actually sent in. His gross will be from 3.5 acres, £525.
Our accounts are not yet audited for the year just completed, but I have, with absolute confidence, I can tell you that when they are finally vetted, that I think the news will exceed anything that you had anticipated. We have made a profit on every single line we have processed here during the year, and I have no doubt whatever but that in the year that we are just about to start, that our returns will be more favourable.
I have another case here of a farmer growing 2.25 acres. His gross, we expect it to be, some of his crop is already in, £260. Another grower, 1.25 acres, a gross of £179. Well, now, these are all concrete examples. I will admit they may be our best growers, but at the same time, we had a cabbage run before we did celery, and all our yields at that time were over the 20 tons per acre. And at 20 tons per acre, that was a gross income at £5 a tonne of £100 per acre. Well, now, as I say, that's this year. Last year there was a very much worse picture, but the picture is this year that it is extremely good.
I think you can state without any shadow of doubt that we are now in our third year a viable and an economically sound concern.
After 3 years' heartbreaking and grinding effort, the cooperative's financial affairs break even. Export means quality, and quality means control. The foodstuffs are sample tested according to the highest international standards by technicians in the Co-op's laboratory, and the end products are tasted daily by a special panel of experienced tasters. But the people of Glencolumbkille are primarily farmers, and farmers, like everyone else, must make money. Mr. Fr McDyer of Glencolumbkille is one of the most optimistic and energetic of these farmers. Now, what in fact have you devoted, of your 6.5 acres, what have you devoted to the cooperative enterprise this year?
This year I did 4 acres. 3 acres of cabbages and 1 of celery.
How did you do on that?
It came out very well this year. The celery, I'll have a net width of about 15 ton. Gross width will be about 17 ton and a half, leaving 2 ton and a half per care. And on the cabbages, I'll have something in the nature of about 50 ton.
What does this mean to you now in money?
Well, celery is 20 pounds a ton, and the cabbage is £5 a ton.
Do you keep an account of any of this?
Yes, I do. Lend me that book, please. To date, I have sent into the factory the net width sent in is 10 ton and a half, and that is actually the third of the celery. It's gone through now. I have to get returns for about 6 ton more, which will leave me about a net width of 5 ton.
I see. And what is the celery worth to you then in income for this year?
20 pounds a ton.
That's just about 250 pounds, a little over possibly.
300 pounds would be the
gross.
The gross.
Yes, but as income.
And income would be about 250 pounds.
250. Well, how did you do on cabbage?
The cabbage is well, it's they're not harvested yet, but I will have roughly about 50 ton of cabbages
50 ton
on the 3 acres.
And what will that mean in income?
That'd be about the gross would be 250 pounds. Less
about
50 pounds.
About 50.
Yes.
And on other sources of income through the cooperative now, what would you make? What would you have made this year?
Yeah, on other sources, you mean have we weren't working for the cooperative?
No, I mean, in fact, how do the other members of the family cooperate?
Yes, well, we do a bit of knitting here, home knitting.
Yes. And on the home knitting now, what would you have made this year?
About 250 pounds.
250. And then 2 members of your family, I believe, work in the Tweed market.
Yes, 2 of the girls are working in the factory.
Yes. What would that bring in, Colin?
One of them is making about £6 a week,
yes.
And the other one about almost £5, not £5 altogether.
I see. So we say that the younger one earns about, say, 210, a little about.
Yes,
210.
something like that.
And the other about 250. Let's say 240.
Yes.
Now that gives us 5, 10, 15, 15. That's £1,100, say, in round figures. A little more, perhaps, but we'd say £1,100.
Yes, something of that nature.
But now, how would this compare, Colin, with the situation for your family income before the cooperative got underway?
Yes, well, before I started working for the cooperative, we had, there was none of this income coming in. There was no market for celery, we weren't growing at all, and there was no cabbages, no market for them. And the only income we had that I used to do a little bit growing early potatoes.
Yes, what would you have made in a year there, Colin?
Roughly about £100 a year.
About 100. Yes. And what would the knitting by the 3 women now, what would that have brought in roughly?
Well, the knitting could have done about 250.
About 250?
Yes.
And from all other sources, what would you say?
Something about £50.
50. We'll say, yes, all right. Well, that will give you an income before the cooperative of about £400 for the family.
Yes, something
with 4 people engaged.
Yes.
And now, since the cooperative success, you're bringing in something above 1,100.
Yes.
Do you find this a satisfactory arrangement?
Yes, I do. I believe that this is the problem the small farmers solved.
You think it's solved in this method of cooperation?
Yes. Beyond all doubt, this is a project, working for the project and solve the problems of the small farmers.
Improved money incomes meant improved homes and improved health. The joys of life come from simple things that we all seem to take for granted. Clean piped water helps not only the public health, but the private housewife's morale. Taps make more joy than buckets and pails. Pioneers in this work of helping the Donegal depressed areas were the devoted workers of Gaeltara Éireann, who set up this Tweed factory in the village of Glencolumbkille in the dark days of the valley's depression. Mr. Sherry, Donegal manager, explains.
We have 6 girls here who examine every piece in detail as it comes off the loom to put any minor defects right. You could term it as a form of quality control.
Well, how many people are there altogether?
Well, taking the whole organisation of the Tweed industry of Gaeltara Éireann, which covers 3 parishes, Kilcar, Ardara and Glencolumbkille, we would have a total of 300 employees.
How much does this represent in money, Mr. Sherry?
In wage value, it would be £2,500 to £3,000 per week.
And what proportion of the product is for export?
Well, I would estimate at the moment, without having been able to give you an accurate figure, that 40% of the tweed produced by Gaeltara Éireann goes directly from here, export, and I should say another 40% goes indirectly through clothing manufacturers who we supply in various parts of the country. So that in total, you could say that 80% of the production of the Donegal tweed that we produce goes direct to export.
Well, now, what does the tweed industry in these valleys mean to the people for the immediate and remote future?
Well, my own personal view is that there's a wonderful future for the Donegal tweed.
The essence of all this togetherness, designed and achieved by Fr McDyer and his helpers, sprang from their common faith and common Catholic traditions. Preparations for the vernacular Mass in Irish were begun as soon as possible. Togetherness, mutual help, cooperation, all these added up to Fr McDyer's main purpose, to keep the young at home in Glencolumbkille and the surrounding parishes. Emigration from the valley has virtually ceased. The marriage rate is at last rising, and the people have money in their pockets and hope and joy in their hearts. The Co-op purchased a plot of land and made a people's park.
Mr. Hardia, be oran organis o Katin Yumley August Amani Yumley.
Soon we're she Akola Mask Nalis Nala Go Mersha Astor Canter
Social life is now part of the pattern of things in Glencolumbkille. The most inaccessible village in Ireland is now one of the gayest and the happiest townlands in the Republic. Nothing reflects the people's confidence in the future more pointedly than their willingness to invest in new church buildings. Their population is rising and is going to further increase. And this year, Fr McDyer's parish priest, Father McGettigan, had the joy of seeing a 3rd parish church blessed by the vicar capitular of the diocese at Meenaneary. The McDyer experiment in cooperation and self-help is no longer a thing of merely local significance. In a truly deep way, Glencolumbkille has set a headline for the small farmers of the Atlantic seaboard. The government has undertaken to finance a similar set of 20 experimental cooperative schemes as a blueprint for the rehabilitation of the West. The eager eyes have been fastened on Glencolumbkille and on its Errigal cooperative. 4 federated committees of similar movements throughout the West, called the Charlestown Committee, is now working for the small landowners on the far side of the Shannon. General Costello of the Irish Sugar Company comments.
I don't believe that myself that the West is overpopulated. In fact, their experience in Glencolumbkille has been that they've been short of labour for some of the crops that are badly wanted. This is not to say now that you can have a food processing plant like Glencolumbkille at every crossroads or in every parish, but there are other things of this kind that can be done, and there is there's a market for a great many more products of the same kind. And for example, we will have a market for about 2.5 times as much celery as was produced in Ireland last year. And this, I think, is the most popular crop in Glencolumbkille and the one that pays them best. But none of these things can be done without the local leadership that was available in Glencolumbkille, without a determination on the part of the people to cooperate with one another, joint effort.
At long last,
Heather O'Donnell.
The inspiration of what's happening in Glencolumbkille, people are waking up to the fact that the homesteads, the land could be used in such a way as to give a reasonable standard of living, and that even though the young people might still have to emigrate, that the pattern of the townland could be preserved, that the breaking up of homes, the shutting down of desertion of holdings and the shutting down of houses, that this could be arrested. Nobody is quite clear at what level it can be arrested, or whether, in fact, it can be arrested completely, because no effort has been made to find out outside the Glencolumbkille effort.
There must be determination, because there was plenty of prophets of woe in connection with Glencolumbkille, and there will be similar people willing to tell the organisers of any similar enterprise that it can't be done. You want somebody tough enough to persist in the face of this. And of course, it can't be done either, even given the local determination. There must be some help from outside in the way of bringing technological skills and knowledge to them for any processing that's required, even for the work on their own farms. And over and above that, there must be somebody to find a market for the produce and to guarantee prices for it. All of these things are interdependent. And really the question, as far as the rest of the West is concerned, is whether the people there are good enough, are tough enough and determined enough to do in their own localities what the people of the parishes of Carrick and Kilcar did. I believe that they are, that they must get the technological help and the financial help that they need.
Doubts have been cast upon the very advisability of trying to keep the small farmer on the land. Standing alone, he must fail. But Fr McDyer has proved that he need not, that he must not stand alone.
The Glencolumbkille project draws its inspiration, in the first case and primarily, from the great sacrifice of our good Lord for all mankind. It is immensely stimulated by the heroic efforts of our own patriotic dead. It is goaded into activity by the enervating flow of emigration, and also by the spectacle of derelict land and neglected land throughout the country. It repudiates all forms of selfishness, no matter what kind, because they are contrary to the common weal. And above all, the Glencolumbkille project is convinced of the necessity of an ardent charity, a blazing patriotism, an iron and flexible determination to overcome all obstacles, and also of the necessity of us to look to our neighbour's good before we look to our own. It can succeed. It must succeed. Please God, it will succeed.
Common social justice, civic friendship, the very dictates of Christian charity, demand of the people of the West that they should unite, stand together, cooperate, or perish. For this may be the last chance.